My name is Samuel Ben David. For 23 years, I have been chief archaeologist at the Israel Institute of Antiquities. I have seen many extraordinary discoveries in my career. I have participated in the excavation of the Dead Sea Scrolls. I have discovered first-century synagogues. I have found coins from the time of Jesus. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I found that April morning in 2023 in the secret caves of Mount Carmel. Let me go back in time a little so you can understand what led me to that sacred mountain. I was not just an archaeologist looking for yet another discovery. I was a broken man looking for answers that science could not provide. My daughter Miriam had died of cancer just 6 months earlier, at the age of 32. The same age Jesus was when he was crucified. The same age the prophet Ezekiel was when he had his first visions. There was something cruelly symbolic about that age that haunted me day and night. Miriam was not just my daughter, she was my best friend, my confidant, the light of my eyes. An archaeologist like me, she had dedicated her life to unraveling the mysteries of the past. Together, we had dreamed of making the discovery that would change our understanding of biblical history. She would often say, "Father, one day we will find something that will prove that the miracles of the Bible were not metaphors, they were spiritual technology that we have lost." When cancer was diagnosed, she maintained her unwavering faith. "Father," she told me in the hospital, "if Elijah could raise the dead, if Jesus healed lepers, then this disease is not the end. It is just a test." But as the months passed and her body withered, my faith began to crumble like ancient parchment exposed to the sun. Where was the God of Elijah? Where was the fire from heaven when my daughter was languishing in a hospital bed? Where was the power that raised the widow of Zarephath's son from the dead when I was begging for Miriam's life? I prayed, I fasted, I cried out, but the heavens remained silent, bronze, impenetrable. On the day of her death, Miriam called me close. Her voice was barely a whisper, but her words penetrated my soul like fire. "Father, promise me one thing. Keep searching, not for the past, but for the power. Elijah left something, I know he did. I dreamed of a cave on Carmel. I saw you going into it. I saw you finding fire. Promise me you will search." I promised, and she left smiling as if she knew something I didn't. 3 months after his funeral, I began to have the dreams. They were always the same. I was on Mount Carmel. The sun was rising over the horizon, and a voice was calling to me from deep within the mountain. The voice spoke not in modern Hebrew, but in archaic Hebrew, the language of the prophets, and it always said the same thing: Ben Adam, Ben Esh, son of man, son of fire. That's when I set up the expedition. Officially, we were looking for traces of the ancient community of prophets who had inhabited these mountains in the time of Elijah. It was my last year before retirement. My colleagues thought I was obsessed with grief. Maybe they were right, but I had a promise to keep. What I didn't tell anyone was about the map. Among Miriam's belongings, I found her final notes. She had been studying obscure Kabbalistic texts, comparing them with ancient inscriptions found in Carmelite monasteries. And she had come to a startling conclusion. There was a secret entrance to unexplored caves in Carmel, an entrance that revealed itself only under specific conditions. Then we found the entrance, hidden for 3,000 years, protected by an ingenious construction that only revealed itself when sunlight hit it at a specific angle on a specific day of the year, the day that marked the beginning of the dry season in Israel. The same day that Elijah declared drought upon the land, the same day that Miriam had been born 32 years earlier. The coincidences were too many to ignore, or maybe they weren't coincidences at all. What we discovered in that cave changed not only my life, it changed my understanding of who Elijah was. and more importantly, of what he really did, and of what each of us can do. But let me warn you, knowledge comes at a price. Once you know, you can no longer not know. Once the fire is lit, it demands fuel, and the fuel is your own life, your own choices, your own transformation. Are you ready for this? The first thing we noticed was the temperature. While the thermometer outside read 35 degrees Celsius, inside the cave, the air was inexplicably warm. It wasn't a natural heat. It was like being next to an invisible fire. My instruments couldn't detect any source of heat, but we all felt it. It was a heat that seemed to come from within, as if our very cells were vibrating at a higher frequency. My team consisted of 5 people besides myself. Dr. David Cohen, an expert in ancient linguistics. Dr. Sarah Levi, a quantum physicist who had become interested in archaeology after unexplained experiments in the lab. Mohammed al-Rashid, our Bedouin guide who knew every stone on Carmel. Rebecca Stern, a photographer and documentary filmmaker. And Jonas Petrosky, our security expert, a former military man who had become a mystic after a near-death experience. On the battlefield, each of us felt something different as we entered the cave. David said he could hear whispers in languages he didn't recognize. Sarah detected electromagnetic fluctuations that didn't make sense. Mohammed fell to his knees and began to pray, saying he could feel the presence of something sacred. Rebecca reported that her cameras were picking up light anomalies invisible to the naked eye, and Jonas, the skeptic of the group, admitted to feeling a sense of peace he hadn't experienced since before the war. The walls were covered with inscriptions in archaic Hebrew, older than any text I had ever studied, but there was something strange about these inscriptions. They seemed to change under different lighting conditions. What appeared to be one word, from one angle would appear to be something completely different from another. It was as if the text were multi-dimensional. David worked feverishly to translate. Samuel, he told me after hours of study, this is not just ancient Hebrew. It is a form of Hebrew that theoretically should not exist. It has elements that seem pre-Babelic, as if it were the original language before the confusion of languages. What's more, the words are arranged in mathematical patterns. Each phrase has a numerical value that corresponds to universal constants. It is as if it were a quantum code written 3,000 years ago. One of the inscriptions read, "Here lies the secret of the fire that does not consume. He who understands will walk among the flames and will not be burned. He who doubts will be consumed by his own limitations." But it was when we reached the second chamber that things got truly extraordinary. The passage was narrow, almost like a birth canal. We had to crawl for several meters in total darkness. And then we emerged into a space that defied logic. The chamber was impossibly large. Our flashlights couldn't reach the ceiling or the distant walls. It was as if we had entered another dimensional space. And in the center, floating in the air with no visible support, was a pulsing orb of light. It was no ordinary fire. It was something that seemed alive, conscious, watching us. Sarah immediately began taking readings. "This is impossible," she muttered. "The energy this sphere is emitting is greater than that of a nuclear reactor. But there is no radiation, there is no excessive heat. It is as if it is pure energy in a state that our physics does not recognize." It was Muhammad who first approached the sphere. "Allah forgive me," he said, "but I know what this is. My grandfather told me stories. The Bedouins have always known that there was something special about this mountain. We call it Nar al-Hayat, the fire of life. They say that Elijah did not bring fire from heaven. He awakened the fire that was already here, waiting since the creation of the world. But it was in the main chamber that we made the discovery that would shake the foundations of everything we knew about Elijah. There, engraved on a bronze tablet that defied all known dating, was what we called The Elijah Protocols. 7. Mystical principles that revealed how the prophet accessed divine power, how he commanded the elements, how he transcended human limitations. The tablet itself was a marvel. Later analysis would show that the bronze contained elements that do not occur naturally on Earth, isotopes that could only have been created under conditions found in the hearts of exploding stars. How something like this could have been forged 3,000 years ago remains a mystery. The first principle spoke of something called the frequency of the sacred fire. According to the text, Elijah had discovered that there is a specific vibration, a spiritual frequency, that when reached, allows a human being to become a direct channel for the creative power of the universe. It was like tuning into a cosmic radio station, but instead of electromagnetic waves, they were waves of pure consciousness. The text provided detailed instructions, specific breaths that were to be taken in precise mathematical sequences. Body, postures that aligned the body's energy centers with the Earth's magnetic fields, vocalizations at frequencies that resonated with the fundamental vibration of the universe, what modern physicists call the Planck frequency. The second principle was even more intriguing. He was talking about the fast of the senses. It wasn't just abstinence from food, it was a systematic process of silencing each of the physical senses in order to awaken what the text called the spiritual senses. Elijah would have spent 40 days in this state before his encounter with God on Mount Horeb. And it was this process that prepared him to hear the still, small voice that would change his ministry forever. The instructions were precise and disturbing. First, the practitioner was to spend 7 days in total darkness to awaken inner vision. Then 7 days in absolute silence to activate spiritual hearing. This was followed by periods of systematic deprivation of each sense, always in cycles of 7. The text warned that this process could lead to madness if not followed exactly as prescribed. The third principle took my breath away. The alchemy of suffering. The text suggested that Elijah had understood something that humanity has forgotten, that pain and suffering, when properly channeled, can be transmuted into pure spiritual power. Every tear shed, every loss suffered, every moment of despair contains within it the seed of a divine transformation. It was when I read those words that tears began to stream down my face. For the first time since Miriam's death, I cried, not out of sadness, but out of understanding. My grief was not a punishment, it was a portal. It was the fuel that had brought me here. It was the key that would unlock the mysteries Miriam had dreamed of finding. The text described specific techniques for energetic digestion of grief, how to visualize grief as black fire and transform it into golden light, how to use specific mantras to transmute emotional energy into spiritual power, how to channel the power of grief into healing ability. It was alchemy in the most literal sense, transforming the lead of grief into the gold of enlightenment. The fourth principle spoke of the sacred geometry of prayer. Elijah had discovered that there are specific mathematical patterns, divine proportions, that when incorporated into prayer, amplify its power exponentially. This is why his prayers were so powerful. He didn't just pray, he built energetic structures with his words, following the same proportions that govern the creation of the universe. The text revealed that each Hebrew word has not only a meaning but a geometric form in spiritual space. When words are arranged according to specific proportions, the golden ratio, the Fibonacci sequence, the Platonic solids, they create patterns of resonance that can literally reorganize reality. There were complex diagrams showing how to structure prayers for different purposes. One structure for healing, another for protection, another for manifestation, and the most powerful of all, the structure for resurrection. It was like discovering God's mathematical equations. The fifth principle was revolutionary, the science of resurrection. The text detailed the exact process Elijah used to raise the widow's son from the dead. It wasn't just faith. It was a precise technique of transferring life energy. Elijah had learned to give his own life force, his own divine spark, to reanimate a dead body. That's why he lay down on the boy 3 times. Each time represented a transfer of 1/3 of his life energy. But there was more. The text explained that death is not the end of life energy, only its dispersal. For a period of time after physical death, the text suggested up to 3 days, life energy remains close to the body, like an invisible cloud. Someone trained in the protocols could collect this energy and redirect it back into the body, effectively reversing death. The implications were staggering. If this were true, it meant that the resurrection was not a supernatural miracle, but a spiritual technology that could be learned and applied. Jonas, our former soldier, was particularly shaken. "Do you know how many of my comrades I've seen die?" he said with tears in his eyes. "If I had known this..." The sixth principle astounded me, the robe of transfiguration. Elijah's famous robe was not just a piece of clothing. It was an object imbued with specific spiritual frequencies. It functioned as an amplifier of spiritual power. Most impressively, the text provided detailed instructions on how to create a similar robe, how to imbue a physical object with permanent spiritual energy. The process was complex and required specific materials. The cloth had to be made of pure linen, grown on consecrated soil. It had to be woven during the night hours, under the light of the full moon, while specific mantras were chanted. Then the robe had to be bathed in sacred oils, prepared according to precise formulas. And finally, it had to be charged through a process of meditation and prayer that took 40 days and 40 nights. Rebecca was documenting everything frantically. "This is incredible," she said. "It's as if Elijah left a technical manual for creating artifacts of power. It's technology, but it's spiritual technology." But it was the seventh and final principle that changed everything. The Merkabah of fire, the chariot of fire that took Elijah to heaven, did not come from outside. It was manifested from within. Elijah had reached such a high level of spiritual vibration that his very body was transformed into light. He did not die. He ascended. And the text suggested that this was not Elijah's exclusive privilege. It was the potential destiny of every human being who mastered the 7 principles. The text described the process in astonishing technical detail. It spoke of the progressive acceleration of cellular vibration. It spoke of how human DNA contains dormant codes that, when activated, allow the physical body to transcend its material limitations. It spoke of how consciousness can literally rearrange matter at subatomic levels. Sarah was in scientific ecstasy. "This aligns with the most advanced theories in quantum physics," she exclaimed. "The idea that consciousness can collapse, the wave function, that observation creates reality. ELIAS was doing applied quantum physics 3,000 years ago. But there was something else deep within the cave, a passage that led even deeper into the mountain. And it was there that we found the final proof that we were not dealing with mere legends or symbolic texts. When I presented our findings to Dr. Abraham Goldstein, director of the Department of Mystical Studies at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, his reaction was one of utter disbelief followed by profound dismay. I convened a secret meeting of the world's leading experts on esoteric traditions. What followed were 3 days of intense debate that would forever change our understanding of ancient mysticism. "Samuel," Dr. Goldstein told me privately after, Examining the evidence, what you have found not only confirms Kabbalistic texts that have been considered allegorical for centuries. It goes further, much further. There are manuscripts in our secret collection, documents that have never been made public, that speak of the primordial protocols. I always thought they were metaphors. Now I see that they were technical manuals, disguised as mysticism. He took me to the university's underground archives, a place few people know about. There, in climate-controlled vaults, were manuscripts dating back to the Second Temple period. "Look at this," he said, opening a yellowed codex. This text was written by a direct disciple of Elijah. It tells of a school of prophets that Elijah established on Carmel. It was not a school in the conventional sense. It was a training center for what he called fire warriors. The manuscript detailed a 7-year training program, each year devoted to mastering one of the principles. Students were subjected to extreme trials, prolonged fasting, isolation in caves, exposure to mortal danger to activate latent powers. Many did not survive the training, but those who completed the 7 years emerged transformed, literally. Witnesses described how their bodies emitted light, how they could be in 2 places at once, how they healed with a touch. Rabbi Yitzhak ben Shlomo, keeper of the secret manuscripts of Safed's oldest synagogue, was even more revealing when I visited him in his ancient library. There is an oral tradition, passed down only among the greatest Kabbalists, that speaks of the lost protocols of the prophets. It is said that each great prophet left behind coded instructions on how to access his specific gifts. Moses's was said to be on Sinai, Isaiah's was said to be somewhere beneath the temple, and Elijah's, we always knew it was on Carmel. You have found what generations of mystics have sought. The rabbi then showed me something extraordinary, a map drawn on sheepskin, dating back to the 12th century. This map was created by Isaac the Blind, the father of modern Kabbalah. He had a vision in which Elijah showed him the location of 7 fire portals around the world. Carmel is just one of them. The others are in Sinai, on Mount Ararat, in the Himalayas, in the Andes, on Mount Shasta in California, and a 7th location which the map simply shows as the heart of the earth. Each portal, the rabbi continued, holds a part of the total knowledge. What you have found in Carmel are the basic principles, but there are deeper levels, techniques that allow not only individual transformation, but collective transformation. Elijah was preparing humanity for something that is yet to come. But the most stunning confirmation came from a completely unexpected source. Father Elijah Thompson, a Carmelite monk who had lived for 60 years in a monastery on Mount Carmel, reached out to us after news of our discovery leaked into closed religious circles. What he revealed would change everything. Our order has kept secrets for 800 years, he began, his piercing blue eyes fixed on mine. Secrets we swore to protect with our lives, but the signs of the times indicate that the time for secrecy has passed. Saint Simon Stock, our founder, had a vision in 1251. In this vision, Elijah himself appeared to him and revealed that he had left 7 keys of fire hidden in the sacred mountain. He said that the day would come when these keys would be revealed to the world, when humanity was ready, when the need was greatest. We Carmelites are the guardians of this secret, and now you have found the keys. Father Thompson then led us through secret passages of the monastery that I never knew existed. We descended spiral staircases that seemed to penetrate the bowels of the mountain. Finally, we arrived at an underground library that took my breath away. Thousands of manuscripts lined up on stone shelves. The air smelled of incense and ancient parchment. "This is the real Carmelite library," he said. "The public library. Upstairs is just window dressing. Here are the real treasures, accounts of monks who, over the centuries, have been able to access some of Elijah's power." documentation of miracles the Church has never officially recognized. And most important, instructions left by those who progressed in the protocols. He showed me a 14th century manuscript. The author was a monk named Brother Johannes. This man, Father Thompson explained, has mastered the first 3 principles. Look what he wrote. The text was haunting. Johannes described how, after months of practicing the holy fire frequency, he began to have visions of the future. He foresaw the Black Death decades in advance and saved his monastery by moving it to the mountains. After mastering the fast of the senses, he developed the ability to bilocate, to be in 2 places at once. He is recorded as simultaneously saying Mass at the monastery and tending to the sick in a village miles away. But it was when he mastered the alchemy of suffering that things became truly extraordinary. Johannes had lost his entire family in a war. The pain had nearly driven him mad, but using ELIAS's techniques, he transformed this suffering into healing power. He became known as the monk who heals with tears. Literally, his tears, when they touched the sick, cured them instantly. But look at this, Father Thompson continued, opening another manuscript. This one is from the 16th century, Sister Teresa of Avila. Yes, the famous mystic. What few people know is that she had partial access to the protocols of Elijah. The manuscript, written in Teresa's delicate handwriting, described her experiences with the 4th principle, the sacred geometry of prayer. She had independently discovered some of the prayer structures that Elijah used. This was why her prayers were so powerful, capable of producing mystical ecstasies and levitation. She is recorded as having floated meters off the ground during her prayers, a phenomenon witnessed by dozens of people. Dr. Rajesh Patel, a quantum physicist at the Bombay Institute of Technology and a scholar of ancient Vedic traditions, offered an even broader global perspective when I consulted him via video conference. What you have discovered about Elijah has striking parallels, not only with the siddhis described in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, but with esoteric traditions around the world. Chinese Taoists speak of 8 immortals who have mastered similar techniques. Shamans in Peru know similar processes. It is as if there is a universal knowledge that has been fragmented and distributed among different cultures. Dr. Patel then shared some surprising data from his own research. Using advanced brain imaging technology, we studied master yogis who demonstrate abilities similar to those described in ELIAS's protocols. We found that their brains operate at frequencies that we normally only see in deep sleep or near-death experiences. But they maintain these frequencies while fully conscious. It is literally a different state of consciousness that science is only beginning to understand. But perhaps the most shocking revelation came from Dr. Michael Sterling, a former NASA scientist who now runs a private institute researching anomalous phenomena. He secretly flew to Israel as soon as he heard about our findings. "What I'm about to share with you is classified," he said, after making me sign multiple non-disclosure agreements. "But I think you need to know. During the Apollo missions, astronauts reported strange phenomena that have never been publicly reported. Visions, mystical experiences, senses of presence. When we analyzed the data, we found that these phenomena occurred when astronauts passed through certain regions of space where the Earth's magnetic field interacts with solar radiation in specific ways." He paused, clearly debating how much to reveal. "What we've discovered is that these interactions create what we call windows of expanded consciousness. These are conditions where the barrier between the physical and the non-physical becomes blurred. From his data on Elijah, I believe, he's figured out how to create these conditions artificially, how to access these states without leaving Earth." Dr. Elizabeth Roth, a German neuroscientist specializing in altered states of consciousness, added another piece to the puzzle during our Berlin conference. We studied the brains of people who had near-death experiences. We found permanent changes in their brain structures, new neural connections, activation of normally dormant areas. It's as if the proximity of death unlocks latent potentials. ELIAS's protocols seem to simulate this unlocking without the need for physical trauma. But it was the testimony of Sheikh Ahmad al-Ajari, the custodian of Sufi manuscripts in Cairo, that put it all together. In esoteric Islam, we know Elijah as Al-Khidr, the Green One, the immortal who guides spiritual seekers. Our texts say that he did not die, but reached the Maqam al-Hayat, the station of eternal life. What is more, he left a path for others to follow. But this path was divided between different traditions to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands. The Sheikh then showed me a 9th century manuscript that made my heart stop. It was a map, not geographical but spiritual. It showed how different mystical traditions around the world held pieces of Elijah's total knowledge. The Kabbalists had one part, the Sufis another, the Yogis another, the Taoists another, the shamans another, and so on. But now, the Sheikh said with a prophetic gleam in his eyes, the pieces are coming together, not by chance, by divine design. Humanity stands at an evolutionary crossroads. The ancient barriers between traditions are falling away. Fragmented knowledge is being reunited. And you, my friend, have found the central piece. The Master Protocol, that unites all others. But there was something else in the cave, something we haven't revealed to the public, something that still haunts me, and that fundamentally changed our understanding of not just the past, but the present and the future. In the deepest chamber, accessible only by a passage that required specific knowledge of the protocols to open, we found evidence that Elijah was not alone, and more disturbing, that he never really left. The passage itself was a test. There were 7 stone doors, each with a cryptic inscription. We were only able to pass through because, by pure intuition, or perhaps guided by unseen forces, each member of the team uttered one of the key phrases from the protocols. The doors opened in sequence, revealing a spiral staircase that descended into the depths of the mountain. What we found at the end of this descent defies rational description. It was a perfectly circular chamber, its walls covered in crystals, that emitted a soft, pulsating light. In the center was what I can only describe as a temporal stasis field. Inside it, preserved in perfect condition, were objects that should not exist. First, we found scrolls written in a language that David could not immediately identify. It was not Hebrew, Aramaic, or any other known language. But there was something familiar about it, as if it were the matrix from which all Semitic languages had been derived. The scrolls contained what appeared to be detailed technical instructions, diagrams of incomprehensible devices, and maps of locations around the world marked with mystical symbols. But it was the second find that left us speechless. They were what I can only call holographic recordings, specially prepared crystals that, when touched, projected 3-dimensional images into the air. We saw Elijah. Not an artistic representation, but the real man, alive, teaching, and he was not alone. There were others with him, dozens, perhaps hundreds, all wearing similar robes, all emanating the same aura of contained power. The recordings showed what appeared to be an initiation ceremony. We saw candidates undergoing ordeals that defied the laws of physics, walking through fire without getting burned, levitating, materializing objects out of thin air, and at the end, the transformation. Their bodies literally dissolving into light before reconstituting themselves into a form that seemed more energy than matter. There were constant references to a Brotherhood of the Eternal Fire, a secret group of initiates who had received the full teachings directly from Elijah before his ascension. But most shocking was the suggestion that this brotherhood was not a relic of the past. It was an active organization, operating in the shadows for millennia, guarding not only knowledge, but preparing something. We found detailed maps, precise coordinates, references to other sacred sites where what the text called the tools of fire were hidden. Objects of power that Elijah would have used, and that would drastically amplify anyone's ability to access. The 7 principles. One such tool would be the actual robe of Elijah, not a symbolic relic or a recreation, but the original robe, preserved by means that defy comprehension. The texts suggested that the robe was not only a power amplifier, but contained within its fibers the very energetic essence of Elijah. Whoever wore this robe would not only receive power, but would access the memories and knowledge of the prophet himself. Another tool mentioned was even more intriguing: the chalice of reversing waters. Supposedly a vessel made of an unearthly material that Elijah used to collect water that miraculously flowed atop Mount Carmel during the drought. This was no ordinary water. It had been reversed at the molecular level, giving it impossible regenerative properties. It could cure any disease, it could reverse aging, it could even, according to the texts, raise the dead if administered within a certain period of time after death. But the most powerful tool of all would be the stone of heavenly fire, a crystal that is said to have fallen from the sky during Elijah's demonstration on Mount Carmel, when he called down fire from heaven to consume the sacrifice. This crystal was no ordinary meteorite. It was described as solidified divine fire, containing within it the very essence of creative power. Whoever learned to activate it could literally command the fundamental forces of the universe. The problem was that the exact locations of these tools were encoded in a language we still can't fully decipher. It was like a quantum code, where the meaning changed based on the reader's state of consciousness. The further one progressed through the protocols, the more the code would reveal itself. It was both a map and a test. But there was something even more disturbing in the records. References to something called the Great Convergence, a future event when the stars would align as in the time of Elijah, and fire from heaven would return to earth. The texts suggested that this would be no random event, but something meticulously prepared by the Brotherhood over the centuries. We found lists, names of people throughout history who were secretly initiated into the protocols. Some were well-known historical figures, mystics, scientists, artists who demonstrated extraordinary abilities. Others were complete strangers, operating in the shadows, paving the way. And then, at the end of the list, something that made me freeze: future dates. Names of people who had not yet been born, events that had not yet happened, as if whoever compiled that list could see through time. And there, on a date close to our own time, I saw something that made me question everything: my own name, and, next to it, a single word: catalyst. Rebecca was filming the whole thing, but when we reviewed the footage later, we discovered something unsettling. At certain points, figures would appear in the background of the footage that hadn't been there when we filmed it. Figures dressed in robes, watching us, as if the very act of uncovering these secrets had attracted the attention of something or someone. Jonas, our security expert, grew increasingly agitated as we explored. "We're being watched," he insisted. "I don't know by whom or what, but all my military experience tells me we're not alone here." And then, in the last chamber we explored, his suspicions were dramatically confirmed. In the months that followed the discovery, something extraordinary began to happen, not only to me, but to the entire team. Each of us, driven by different personal reasons, began experimenting with protocols. What we discovered was that the benefits went far beyond what any of us could have imagined. These were not just psychological or spiritual changes. They were fundamental transformations on every level of our being. I began with the first principle, the frequency of the sacred fire. The text described specific techniques that initially seemed simple: rhythmic breathing, specific postures, vocalizations at precise frequencies, but the simplicity was deceptive. Each element had to be executed with mathematical precision. A few seconds error in the breathing rhythm and nothing would happen. A slightly misaligned posture and the energy would scatter. For the first 2 weeks, I experienced only frustration. My body ached from the postures. My mind wandered during the meditations. I was about to give up when I remembered Miriam's last words. "Keep searching, Father. Fire responds to persistence." It was in the 3rd week that the change began. At first it was subtle sensations, a tingling at the base of my spine, warmth in my palms, sharper peripheral vision. But on the morning of the 21st day, as I practiced at sunrise on the terrace of my apartment in Jerusalem, it happened. I felt as if every cell in my body began to vibrate in unison. It was as if I had become a human tuning fork, resonating at a frequency that had always existed, but that I had never realized. The sensation was simultaneously terrifying and ecstatic. For a moment, the boundary between my body and the air around me seemed to dissolve. I was me, but I was also everything. And then, for a brief but eternal moment, I saw it. I saw Miriam. Not as a memory or a hallucination, but present, real, radiant. She stood before me, smiling, enveloped in a light that came from no external source. "Father," she said, and her voice resounded not in my ears, but directly into my consciousness. "You have found it. Fire does not destroy, it transforms. I have not left. I have ascended. And you can ascend too, even while still in physical body. Continue. The protocols are real, more real than you can imagine." Then she touched my forehead, and I felt a burst of knowledge, memories that were not my own, understandings that transcended words. I saw glimpses of ancient civilizations that had mastered these principles. I saw the potential future of humanity. I saw the role each of us had to play in the coming Great Awakening. When the vision ended, I was lying on the floor, crying uncontrollably. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of understanding, of indescribable joy. The pain of losing Miriam hadn't gone away, but it had been transformed. It was now fuel for my journey, no longer a weight weighing me down. From that day on, synchronicities began to multiply in an impressive way. Books that I needed to read would mysteriously appear on my desk. People with exactly the knowledge I needed would cross my path by chance. Vivid dreams would show me the next steps in my practice. It was as if the entire universe had become my teacher. The second principle, the fast of the senses, brought even deeper insights. Sarah, our physicist, was the most dedicated to this protocol. Her motivation was scientific. She wanted to understand the mechanisms behind phenomena. What she discovered transformed her from a skeptic to a devoted practitioner. "Samuel," she told me after her first 7-day cycle of total darkness, "it's as if I've lived my entire life looking at the world through a dirty glass. Now the glass has been cleaned. No, more than that. The glass has been removed. I can perceive energy fields that have always been there, but that our normal senses filter out. I can literally see the quantum interconnectedness between all things." She began to demonstrate abilities that defied her own scientific training. She could predict with eerie accuracy when her phone would ring and who would be calling. She could sense people's emotions before they even walked into the room. In a controlled experiment we conducted, she was able to describe in detail the contents of sealed envelopes. But it was David, our linguist, who made the most surprising discovery with the second principle. After completing a 7-day auditory fast, he developed the ability to understand languages he had never studied before. Not perfectly, but well enough to grasp the general meaning. It's as if, he explained, I could hear the intent behind the words, not just the sounds, as if there were a universal language underlying all human languages. The third principle, the alchemy of suffering, was the most challenging and transformative for all of us. Mohammed, our Bedouin guide, had deep wounds of his own. He had lost his entire family in a terrorist attack years earlier. The pain had made him withdrawn, bitter and distant. But when he began to practice the transmutation techniques, something miraculous happened. It's like taking poison and turning it into medicine, he told me with tears in his eyes. Every painful memory, when processed through the protocol, releases an incredible amount of energy. Energy that can be directed toward healing, toward creativity, toward love. My family did not die in vain. Their deaths became the source of my power to help others. Mohammed began demonstrating healing abilities that attracted people from all over the region. His hands emitted a warmth that eased chronic pain. His presence soothed the traumatized. He established a free healing center in the desert, where Bedouins and Israelis came together, united in their search for relief. For me, the alchemy of grief was a journey of reconciliation with the loss of Miriam. Following the precise instructions of the protocol, I learned to visualize my grief as a dark, dense substance in my chest. Through specific breaths and visualizations, I began to transform this darkness into golden light. Not metaphorically, literally. During one particularly intense session, my body began to emit a visible glow. Rebecca, who was documenting the process, captured the phenomenon on video. Later analysis showed that the light was not coming from any external source. It was emanating directly from my skin, particularly from the heart area. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a Harvard neuroscientist who heard about our findings through academic channels, flew to Israel to study the changes in our brains. What she found revolutionized her understanding of neuroscience. The changes in your brains are unprecedented, she told us, after weeks of testing. Areas that normally show activity only during profound mystical experiences or near-death states are permanently active. In you, even more striking, we found activity in regions of the brain that we thought were vestigial, with no function. It's as if the protocols were activating brain hardware that was there all along, just waiting for the right software. She discovered that our brains were producing neurotransmitters in combinations never before observed. DMT, the spirit molecule, was being produced naturally at levels far above normal, but there were also completely new compounds that she couldn't identify. It's as if you're operating on an upgraded brain operating system, she joked, but there was genuine amazement in her voice. The fourth principle, the sacred geometry of prayer, completely revolutionized our understanding of the power of words and intention. Jonas, our skeptical ex-military man, was the one who was most surprised by the results. He had started practicing it more out of curiosity than belief, but the results were undeniable. I spent 20 years in combat, he told me. I saw things that broke me inside. Severe PTSD, nightmares every night, heavy medication just to function. But when I started structuring my prayers according to the proportions Elijah left, something changed, not gradually, instantly. Jonas developed a specific prayer framework for trauma healing. Following the mathematical proportions of the protocol, he created what he called a sonic mandala, a pattern of words and silences that literally reorganized the neural patterns of trauma. Within a month of practicing, he was completely medication-free. His nightmares had ceased. More than that, he had developed a peaceful presence that affected everyone around him. A striking example of the power of this principle occurred with my grandson, Miriam's son. At age 8, he was diagnosed with a rare congenital heart condition. Doctors insisted that surgery was the only option, but the risks were enormous. In desperation, I constructed a specific prayer structure using the protocol's proportions, focused on heart healing. For 7 days, at sunrise and sunset, I prayed the structured prayer. On the 7th day, something extraordinary happened. During the prayer, I felt a presence. Miriam was there, her hands on mine. "Together, Father," I heard her voice, and together we completed the prayer structure. On the 8th day, we took my grandson for further tests before his scheduled surgery. The doctors were baffled. The condition had completely disappeared, not improved, gone, as if it had never existed. The head of pediatric cardiology called it an unexplained spontaneous remission, but I knew the truth. Sacred geometry had rearranged the very physical structure of my grandson's heart. The 5th principle, the science of resurrection, was the most controversial and dangerous. We agreed as a team that we would not attempt human resurrections. The ethical implications were too great. But we did experiment with plants and small animals, always with deep respect for life. Rebecca had the most success with this protocol. Perhaps because she was an artist, she had a natural sensitivity to the flow of life energy. She started with wilted plants, progressed to insects, and eventually managed to revive a bird that had crashed into a window. "The secret," she explained, "is to understand that death is not a binary switch. It is a process, and during that process, life energy does not disappear instantly. It disperses gradually. The protocol teaches how to collect this dispersed energy and reconcentrate it in the body. The process was exhausting. Each resurrection, even of small creatures, required a significant transfer of life energy from the practitioner. Rebecca was often exhausted for days after a successful session, but she also reported profound experiences during the process. "It's like touching the very fabric of life," she said. "You feel the interconnectedness of everything. You understand that life and death are not opposites, but parts of a continuum. What's more, during the energy transfer, I sometimes get flashes of something, as if the creature I'm reviving is showing me where it was during death. It's always a place of indescribable light and peace." The 6th principle, the mantle of transfiguration, took us on a fascinating journey of creating objects of power. Each of us decided to create our own mantle following the ancient instructions. The process took exactly 40 days and 40 nights. As prescribed, we found a weaver in Bethlehem who still practiced the old methods. We explained that we needed the highest quality linen woven on a handloom. The old weaver, upon hearing our story, revealed something surprising. His family had maintained the tradition of weaving sacred robes for generations, waiting for the day when someone would come looking with the right knowledge. The process of creation was itself an initiation. Each thread had to be blessed. Each knot had to be made with specific intention. During the nights of weaving, we kept vigil, chanting the mantras that protocol prescribed. The air around the loom often shimmered with visible energy. When my robe was finished and I first put it on, the sensation was indescribable. It was like being enveloped in liquid fire that would not burn. Every cell in my body responded. Memories that were not my own flowed through me, glimpses of others who had worn similar robes through the centuries. But most impressive were the practical effects. By wearing the cloak during meditation or prayer, all other practices were amplified exponentially. Healings that would normally take weeks of practice happened in minutes. Visions that required hours of meditation came instantly. It was literally wearable spiritual technology. But it is the 7th principle that haunts and calls to me that represents the culmination of the entire journey. The Merkabah of fire. The possibility of conscious ascension, of transcending not through death, but in spite of it. The instructions are all there, engraved in ancient stone, clear and precise, but they require a level of preparation, purity, and spiritual power that few in history have achieved. Elijah achieved it, and he left the way open for others to follow, but the path is narrow, dangerous, and requires sacrifices that most are not willing to make. After months of practicing the first 6 principles, I felt I was ready to at least understand the 7th. The instructions began with a solemn warning. He who seeks the Merkabah must be prepared to leave everything behind. For once the fire of ascension is lit, there is no turning back. You become something new, something that belongs neither wholly to this world nor the next. The protocol described a 49-day process of intensive preparation, specific fasts, meditations that lasted for entire days, exercises that progressively accelerated cellular vibration until the physical body began to become less dense. It was literally a manual for transforming matter into conscious energy. But there were prerequisites. The practitioner had to have completely mastered the first 6 principles. He had to have resolved all the outstanding issues in this world, and most importantly, he had to have received the call, an unmistakable signal that it was time to take the next step. 3 nights ago, I received this call. I was meditating in my robe when suddenly the reality around me began to dissolve. I found myself in a space that was neither physical nor entirely spiritual, and there before me stood Elijah. Not the Elijah of religious paintings or even of earlier visions. This was Elijah in his true form, a being of pure conscious fire, vaguely human in form, but composed entirely of living flames that danced and pulsed with an intelligence of their own. His eyes were portals to infinity, containing within them the birth and death of stars. "Samuel ben David," he said, and his voice was like the roar of 1,000 fires and the whisper of